Videos like these are made possible by viewers like you, who support the channel through Patreon, channel memberships, and stream donations. And don't forget to check out the Bad Weapon Rehabilitation servers at www.badweaponrehab.tf. Check the links in the description for more information, and let's get into the video. It's hard for me to call this a full-on review because at the time of writing this script, I've only done one playthrough of Doom the Dark Ages. For plenty of people, hell, even for most people, that's probably enough. A lot of people only play through a game's single-player campaign once after all, which is totally understandable. But the modern Doom games are especially replayable. I have over 500 hours between playing Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. They're difficult games that require you to learn their systems for efficient mastery, especially if you want to beat the game on the coveted Ultra Nightmare difficulty. This on top of the fact that the Dark Ages is sure to change as time goes by with things like DLC and hopefully master levels, fixes, and maybe even some balance changes being added down the line, is what's leading me to not call this a full review and more of a first impressions video. Keep in mind that after my first playthrough of Doom Eternal, I actually liked 2016 more, but after my second Eternal playthrough, that's when everything really clicked for me, and I realized it was one of the best FPS games ever made, and the whiners on the internet just got filtered by it hard. I haven't kept track of too much Dark Ages discourse because discourse in general is fucking exhausting, so I haven't been influenced by anyone's outside opinions. I know for a fact that some people are going to be going into this game looking for essentially Doom Eternal Plus, and I'm going to have to disappoint those people. This is a very different game experience that's trying something completely new, and I personally think it's a very interesting and fun direction for the series to go in. I'll start off with some basics. The game looks and runs great. I did have a few issues with hard system crashes after playing the game for extended periods of time, but quitting out to the desktop every couple hours managed to fix that. I also know that some people have had crashing issues after updating their Nvidia drivers to the latest patch, which I was thankfully able to avoid doing. I had no frame drops, no slowdown, the game is beautifully optimized, and the engine is amazing. Here's my system specs in case you're curious, since I know a lot of people ask me about that anyway. There you go, now you know. So if you have my system or better, you'll have a great time running this game. And with that out of the way, I want to go over some concerns I initially had going in, so let's start with that. For one thing, the speed. Eternal was not only a game notorious for its difficulty, but also its raw speed. Everything was fast, you were fast, weapon switching was fast, enemies were fast, even the pace of the game was fast, giving you 2 weapons and 3 upgrades in the first level. I adore the speed of Doom Eternal, and I was worried that since Dark Ages was going in such a different direction, the game speed would feel too sluggish in comparison. However, I think that has a lot to do with the marketing of the game, and they didn't do a great job at selling just how fast both you and the enemies in this game can be. I was constantly being caught off guard by fast enemies and projectiles that really tested my reflexes and parry timing, and that's just in the default speed settings. You can crank the speed of everything up even higher to get speed that makes Eternal look sluggish. Just for the sake of testing what it's like, I've tried the game on Nightmare difficulty with all the settings jacked up to their highest difficulty. You're not ready for it. You think you are, but you're not. But if you really think the game is too slow, then I'd certainly implore you to try these settings out and tell that to me again with a straight face. Even though you don't have your dash, meat hook, or double jump anymore, the game more than makes up for that with a very fast sprint, a shield bash that crosses massive distances on top of dealing some serious damage, and a sort of delayed double jump after you walk off a ledge. The movement feels very satisfying, bouncing from one enemy to the next across these sprawling battlefields, sprinting around looking for secrets, it's all great. Next, I was worried that the game might end up being a bit too easy. Again, due in part to the same reason in the marketing. A lot of promotional material had the enemies looking particularly sluggish in their aggression and their projectile speed, along with all the parries being especially easily telegraphed. Now, personally, I'll gladly take easily telegraphed parries over attacks where I'll have no idea if it's even possible to parry them until I trial and error my way through a fight with the same enemy multiple times. Soulsborne games. But the easily telegraphed parries combined with the low aggression and slow speed made it seem like the game would be intensely easygoing. Even more so than Tag 2. Well, not to worry because the game is still pretty damn hard. Maybe not as much of a ballbuster as Eternal, but that's hard to judge because I've gotten a lot better at Doom games in the 5 years since Eternal and Ultra Violence kicked my ass. But if you're playing on the higher difficulties, the game is going to make you learn its systems, and once it forces you to lock in and use everything you have at your disposal, it feels pretty awesome. This especially kicked in towards the end of the game for me. That's when things really started to click. Those were my two biggest concerns going in, though I had some smaller concerns that do unfortunately rear their heads throughout the game. I'll be going through the game segment by segment so I can talk more about those things in detail. And let's start with the meat and potatoes of the game, the combat. Dark Ages has very satisfying combat. The sound design of the guns is especially punchy, enemies take appropriate amounts of damage and their body parts fly all over the place, and the upgrades make a dramatic difference with each weapon. The shield saw will quickly become your best friend. It's integral to everything you do in the game, and it's extremely versatile. You can use it to block incoming damage, but this only works up to a certain point. If you play too passively and block too much damage, it'll temporarily disable your shield for a few seconds, and you don't want to be without your shield. Some of the attacks that you can parry are pretty devastating if you don't manage to parry them. So if you break your shield by the time a Revenant is charging up his super fast skull attack, you're just gonna have to sit there and eat that damage. It's not often that you'll need to block damage. In fact, if you do have to block damage, it's once again a sign that you're likely playing too passively. Enemies like Arachnotrons and Cyberdemons will pelt you with automatic fire at long ranges, which is low damaging and low cost to block, allowing you to close the distance on them where they're much more manageable to fight. I think the shield breaking and enemies being easier to fight up close are a really smart way to keep you up close and personal where the devs clearly want you to be. This on top of the designs of a lot of the guns, which don't really encourage long-range play to nearly the same degree as some weapons from 2016 and Eternal. No more Gauss Cannon, Ballista, and Precision Bolt Heavy Cannon, and that's good because with how huge some of these maps and arenas are, it would be way too easy to cheese enemies with long-range options. And for closing that gap on those huge maps, there's once again no better tool to use than the shield, which has a bash attack that can lock onto enemies from very long range. You can even upgrade the shield so that by killing fodder demons with the shield toss, you'll boost the damage of your bash. It's enough to 2-tap a lot of heavy demons. Some of the speedrunner psychos have already figured out ridiculous movement tech with this, because of course they have, and it's fitting that you have a shield and a grenade launcher in this game because, hey, close enough, welcome back Demo Knight Trimping. The versatility of the old Super Shotgun's meat hook is missed a bit, but I think the shield bash is a great substitute that fits the game it's in perfectly. It's like they saw how awesome the meat hook was and said, hey, what if we basically put the meat hook on every gun in the game, and also let it parry and you can throw it like Captain America. Also, it's a chainsaw. The shield throw is another versatile feature. Killing scores of fodder enemies without having to spend any ammo is very helpful, and doing so charges up your shield bash, and it can be used against enemies with armor or shields, since once those are overheated by dealing damage to them, you can throw the shield at them to do AoE damage and pick up their armor for yourself. But arguably its best use is being able to lock down heavy demons in place with a single target stun. But this is especially useful for mobile and dangerous enemies like Revenants, Cacodemons, and Whiplashes, all of whom make a comeback with a vengeance. The downside to this is that you can't use your shield for its other uses while the enemy is in the stunned state, but it shouldn't take more than a super shotgun blast or two to get them into the finisher range. And finally, the shield gives you the ability to parry certain demon attacks, both close range melee attacks and long range projectiles. The parries in this game are not quite as devastating as they are in something like a Soulsborne game, but they are just as much an offensive maneuver as they are a defensive one. I'd often find myself weaving back and forth between large projectiles just so I could get off multiple parries in a row. It's satisfying. On top of this, there are further upgrades you can put on your shield that make it so your parries will be even more rewarding. By sending out a large shockwave, activating a shoulder-mounted turret, blasting nearby enemies with stunning lightning, or my favorite, firing Virgil summon swords at them. Fuck yes, it just rips through them, oh my god. Now there is one issue I have with the parries, and it's one that I was worried about from the first time I saw gameplay footage, and that's the slowdown. Every time you successfully parry an attack or hit an enemy with your melee, you'll go into this sort of Zack Snyder 300 slowdown cool guy state for a short period of time before the action kicks in again. This, I think, can contribute to the combat feeling slower than it actually is, because it's basically pausing itself over and over again. Now sometimes I actually appreciated it because the action was so intense that I didn't mind having a second or two to take a breather and reevaluate things. It's kind of the same way I felt about glory kills and chainsaw kills in Eternal. It's not just practical for gameplay reasons, it's a short breather where you can collect yourself, analyze the battleground, and plan your next move. However, with the Dark Ages slowdown, it's constant. you're parrying and bashing enemies with your melee multiple times in a single fight. And despite the game having frankly amazing accessibility settings that let you make the game as easy or as hard as you want it, let you change the color of parryable attacks, and let you see a little pixelated Doom guy's face on the HUD, you can't edit the frequency, duration, or existence of this slowdown at all. It's not the worst thing in the world exactly, but it does lose its cool factor pretty quickly, and there's times where I'm basically telling the game to wrap it up with cinematic stuff and let me get back to the fight already. I've seen a mod already made that removes this slowdown, and it honestly looks way better and more fluid. I hope this becomes an actual option soon. Luckily, once you do get back in the fight, the game makes it very satisfying with its great selection of guns. The guns are some of the first thing that stood out to me about Dark Ages. From the word go, the first gun you get, the combat shotgun, feels awesome to use. It's got a good punch to it, works great even at longer ranges, cuts through multiple fodder enemies, and the sound design overall is very nice. But there's also a good amount of variety to be found here in a way that seems to replace the old weapon mod system of the previous two Doom games. See, before you had the base weapon, and you could choose between two weapon mods for it, each with its own tree of upgrades that basically turned it into a completely different weapon. Rockets could home onto enemies in a triple shot burst or explode in midair, the combat shotgun could shoot rapid fire rounds or long range explosive projectiles, and the heavy cannon could have a high powered precision shot or bursts of small homing missiles. Now, it's like each of those weapon mods, it's basically its own weapon, cutting out the middleman. So you can choose between a Skull Crusher that has a wide spread that gives you a firing speed and movement speed boost, or one with a tight spread that gives you health and ammo pickups on single targets. But that's not all, because most of these weapons will also have different upgrades that you can swap between at any time. So you can choose whether your accelerator has a tighter spread or a faster rate of fire, or whether your rocket launcher deals a high damage burst after parries, or has a higher splash radius. I think it's an interesting take on the old system, however it does come with its set of issues. For one thing, I think the balancing between each type of gun isn't the best. And in my experience, I found that some were just flat out better than others. I much prefer the Cycler over its accelerator counterpart, and the rocket launcher feels much better than the grenade launcher, and the Impaler clears the shredder so hard. Even the Skull Crusher example I listed earlier feels like it falls well in favor of the tight spread Ravager as opposed to the widespread Pulverizer. Now, a couple of weapons don't have counterparts like this, and those are the Chain Shot and this game's version of the BFG, the Ballistic Force Crossbow, which basically works as a miniature nuke as opposed to the slow-firing insta-kill tendrils of the old BFG. And I think it works great for this game from both an aesthetic and a gameplay perspective. The handheld ballista fits in great with the medieval sci-fi theme aesthetic, and the fact that it's a giant AoE bomb instead of the old BFG tendril ball is much more balanced with the more open arenas that this game offers, and it makes up for its shortcomings compared to the BFG by packing a major punch. This will absolutely still be a weapon that high-level players avoid, just so they don't make the game too easy. The Chain Shot, meanwhile, is just a ridiculously fun weapon that bonks the shit out of your enemies and punches holes in their armor. I fucking love this thing. Another thing is that there's no longer weapon mastery challenges for the final tier of your weapon. Or rather, there are still mastery challenges, but the only thing they unlock is a gold skin for that particular weapon. They're totally optional and cosmetic. I think overall, this is a good change since it could get pretty annoying having to grind specific actions in order to get the best performance out of your weapons, especially if it made you play in a way that's unnatural or in the worst cases outright detrimental. Doom 2016 was especially bad with this, needing to do extremely specific things against extremely specific enemies just to get mediocre upsides on mediocre weapon mods. Precision bolts and lock-on rockets stick out of my mind especially there. Now, with all these weapons at our disposal, there's one thing that absolutely needs to be addressed, and that's weapon switching. It's pretty slow, and I know id wanted this to be a different game experience from Eternal, no quick swap combos that shred through health bars. I completely understand that. But at the same time, the weapon swapping in this game feels slow to the point of being almost clunky. Like, it leaves you open for just too long when you really want to keep the firepower up. And so for a lot of fights, I just ended up using what I already had out unless I saw something like energy shield guys who I knew would be weak to plasma fire. And the weapon I stuck with the most was easily the super shotgun. It's incredibly powerful in this game, and very satisfying to use, blowing away targets like Hell Knights and Arachnotrons in a single blast. and it's so powerful that I never really felt the need to switch away from it, especially because ammo was so plentiful thanks to the melee system. This is kind of the replacement for the chainsaw in the previous games, and I think in some aspects it's a welcome change. Not only could it get kind of annoying seeing the same chainsaw kill animation on fodder enemies over and over again when you're topping yourself off on ammo in Eternal especially, but each melee weapon is also its own unique tool with different upsides and drawbacks. The Gauntlet has the longest combo and can apply the shock effect to enemies, which is basically a mark for death that lets you deal extra damage to them, but it has the lowest damage of all the melee weapons. The Flail hits harder and deals extra damage to armor on top of dropping armor itself, but it has less charges and comes back slower. And the Mace is absolutely fucking broken. It drops all the ammo you can possibly carry for all your weapons with the exception of the crossbow, and it deals insane damage to both single targets and crowds of enemies with splash damage, with the only downside being it has one attack on a fairly long cooldown. But the cooldown of your melee attacks can be brought down with both parries and headshots from the Impaler, making this not all that much of an issue. Where I find issue with this new system is that as long as you're getting a melee swing in every once in a while, ammo management has basically been completely trivialized, except at the hardest possible game settings. And that means there's not much reason to stick with anything besides whatever gun works out best for you, rather than needing to switch in between different guns for different situations. Again, I'm not asking for Doom Eternal quick swapping here, I'm just saying that with such a massive arsenal of guns at my disposal, I'd like reasons to use them besides just switching it up for the sake of variety. I fully expect that this might not be the case on higher difficulty settings, or even just on Nightmare difficulty, but that doesn't completely solve the issue that switching between weapons feels so slow that I'd rather just not do it at all. It's not like the combat isn't satisfying, but this one thing is a consistent frustration. I'm not asking for quick swapping combos back or anything, I just think that swapping weapons in the heat of the moment should be more convenient for the player in a way that doesn't take away from the challenge too much. And challenge this game does have. Some of the enemies in this game are real bastards, but in a way that feels satisfying to overcome, rather than just annoying to deal with. Most enemies in the game will come with some sort of parryable attack that you can send right back to them, but some of them don't, like the many different fodder soldier enemies, whether or not they have a shield, or the smaller imps. Stone imps, meanwhile, make their return, and they're way better than they were in Tag 2. For one thing, you can actually shoot them with other stuff besides the combat shotgun, and for another thing, they're much more engaging to fight. Their old spin dash attack from Tag 2 is now parryable, and it has pretty tight timing, but if you succeed, it sends out these 3 projectiles out in random directions towards the other enemies, meaning they can actually be beneficial to keep alive for a short period of time, so you can dish out damage to multiple enemies off of one parry. And if you don't like this and just don't want to take your chances, then you can easily just bonk them to death with your shield or shoot them dead. But unlike other fodder enemies, they're immune to the shield's toss, so you have to be mindful with them out in the field. They're much more multifaceted now as opposed to the no-thoughts, head-empty, spam-full auto nuisances that were back in Tag 2. I give this iteration a thumbs up. There's also Imp Stalkers, who look a lot like the classic imps from the original Doom games. They're some of the earliest heavy demons you'll encounter with the easiest parryable projectile, but they also have a Spectre variant that's much more dangerous and can easily catch you off guard if you're not looking carefully. Because they're invisible, you can't lock onto them with a shield bash, but if you toss your shield out into the void, sometimes the void will catch it, and you can capitalize on this fairly easily, which is very satisfying and reasonable counterplay. Pinkies also make their return, but this time as mounts for demonic riders, and I found these to be some of my favorite enemies to fight. They're just very satisfying to kill. They fire multiple different kinds of parryable projectiles, with the fast charge one being especially satisfying to send back at the archer. There's no more gimmick of needing to hit the Pinky from behind either. Just go ahead and blast his brains away to your heart's content. Hell yeah. Hell Knights and their armored variant, the Battle Knights, are extremely aggressive and basically need to be parried, but once you get the super shotgun, they're not so bad and they go down pretty quickly. Many demons will have armored variants like the Mancubus and Arachnotron, and sometimes these variants will come with different attacks on top of being more difficult to take down, so they really keep you on your toes. If you ask me, the 3 big bastards of the heavy demons are the Whiplashes, the Revenants, and the Cacodemons. Whiplashes and Eternal were already annoying, but Revenants and Cacodemons have never been particularly difficult enemies in the newer Doom games. But oh man, did that change here. Okay, Revenant's down. That makes it a lot easier, hopefully. Oh, I say that. You know why I say that? I say that because I'm a fucking idiot. Revenants will pelt you with projectiles while frequently turning nearly invulnerable to damage, meaning you just have to take whatever they throw at you and give it back to them. And cacodemons, in their new Lovecraftian form, will block your shots with these net-like barriers, blast you with high-damaging, fast-moving parryables, and absolutely shred you with their bites at close range. This is the one enemy you really don't want to get close to, and this unique role really shakes up an arena every time one comes in. The Super Heavies are also really satisfying to fight, and their roster consists of corrupted Barons of Hell, Vagaries who make their return from Doom 3 and can be real sons of bitches to take down with their toxic floor goo that also inflicts slowdown, Agadon Hunters who look quite a bit different from their future Doom Hunter forms, and the new Komodos who can be especially overwhelming. Some of these guys even show up as bosses before they become regular enemies, kinda like the Marauder in Eternal. And the bosses are also pretty good, though they're sparse until the late game. The final boss in particular will test your parry skills, and even though I'm not much into gank fights, it's interesting to manage both his attacks and the witches at the same time, while also trying to find a good opening. It's a dramatic improvement over the Dark Lord boss fight at the end of Tag 2. Not that it's an especially hard bar to jump over. Overall, it's a solid roster of enemies. However, there is one thing that is noticeably absent when it comes to these characters, and that's a serious lack of glory kills. Now, glory kills are still in the game to a certain degree. You get an enemy into a dazed state, and then finish them off with a melee or a shield bash to get health and ammo, and if you attack them from above, you're likely to get a more traditional style glory kill where you execute them with their shield saw, and it's very satisfying to watch. However, these regular melee executions are what you'll be seeing the most often, and I totally understand why this is the case, but I'd like to be able to opt in to seeing more regular glory kills more often. They had so much personality behind them, not just for Doomguy himself, but also for the demons he killed. It really helps to sell the idea that the only thing they fear is me, when I can actually see the fear in an Archvile's eyes as I'm about to turn his brains into creamed corn. And I'll always lament not being able to rip out a Prowler's spine or decapitate a Marauder with his own axe. You do always get a glory kill on certain mini-boss enemies, who act as a means of upgrading your health, armor, and ammo pool. These replace the Argent Cells in 2016 and the Crystals in Eternal, and I think this change is awesome. Tying base upgrades into a tough mini-boss fight feels great, and it makes me feel like I'm earning these upgrades way more than it did in previous games, even when I found them through a secret, which some of these encounters are. Some of them are totally optional and even outright count as secrets. And boy oh boy is there a lot of optional and secret stuff in this game. So for one thing, I mentioned earlier how your weapons have different upgrade trees. Well, in order to upgrade your weapon, you need gold, rubies, and the final element to master your weapon, Wraith Stones. And these are all around the game's many levels, along with other collectibles like the classic toys and lore books, as well as life sigils, which are this game's equivalents to the extra lives seen in Doom Eternal. These work completely differently now. In Eternal, you could hold as many lives as you wanted, and they activated automatically whenever you took fatal damage. Now, you have the option to decide whether or not you want to continue after death, and you can only hold 3 extra lives at a time. I think this is a way better system. It keeps you in the game without removing all the challenge, and lets people who don't want to be handheld through the campaign decline the offer for a second try. Kinda like the revives in Devil May Cry 5. No complaints here. Now, the materials for weapon upgrades are where I start to have some mixed feelings for a lot of different reasons. In 2016, you got weapon upgrade points through doing basic combat, completing each level's optional challenges, and by finding the secrets in the level. It turned to remove the need for finding secrets, which I actually greatly appreciated, especially as someone who plays the games on Ultra Nightmare and often has to grind through early game areas whenever I die. And now you only have to do basic combat encounters, Slayer gates, and the mini time challenges to get your weapon upgrade points. And the optional level-based challenges give you suit points for passive upgrades. Now in Dark Ages, the only thing that matters is finding the upgrade materials, and a lot of these are hidden secrets throughout the level, especially the big chest filled with large amounts of gold. Now the good parts about this are that 1, there's no Fortress of Doom to go to get a bunch of other crap that's locked behind batteries that you have to slot in over and over again. It's all just out in the levels, which is a serious blessing. And 2, even though some of the maps are huge, the location of every single item is marked off on the map, so you know exactly where you need to go in order to find everything in the level. I think this was a necessary change. Coming through every single minuscule area just to find that last bit of gold would be incredibly tedious on these massive maps, and it makes getting 100% a lot easier. Now you'd think this would totally ruin the point of secrets, but now most of them are hidden behind these little puzzles. And a lot of these are really well designed, and some left me scratching my head a bit. My absolute favorites were the ones in the Lovecraftian section of the game. I loved how the game played around with level geometry and impossible spaces there. It was a lot of fun. But issue number one that I have with this system is that there are multiple sections throughout many levels where you reach a point of no return, or a poner as we call it in the business. Meaning once you cross that poner, you could very easily miss out on any secrets, leaving you constantly checking your map like you're playing Silent Hill for the first time and you're trying to make sure you're going the right way. Also, I found my map to be weirdly buggy, like sometimes it would just move forward on its own, sometimes it wouldn't rotate. It fixed itself whenever I reloaded the map, but it just wasn't the most functional. Now in Doom Eternal, going through a poner really wasn't that big of a deal since once you got to the end of a level, you could warp back to other earlier points in the level to grab whatever you missed, and then just warp right back to the end once you collected everything. It was a nice quality of life system, but that feature is not present here, meaning if you miss one thing, you have to go all the way back through the entire level all over again. Now for a lot of things like lore books and toys, this doesn't matter. They're purely cosmetic and optional to obtain for the sake of completionism. But it does matter for gold, rubies, and especially wraith stones. See, the previous games gave you a lot of extra weapon upgrade and suit points, more than you needed throughout the entire playthrough, and you only needed to get the points and complete the mastery challenges to max out your weapons. But this meant that players who were especially thorough could max out their gear more quickly, without punishing players who weren't going through the process of trying to 100% the game. They could get their gear upgraded just the same, but at a slower rate. I think that's a fair trade-off. But here, if you want to upgrade all of your weapons to their maximum capacity, you have to find all the wraith stones. They give you plenty of extra gold and a few extra rubies, but there's exactly enough wraith stones in the game to upgrade your entire kit and no more. I think that's pretty punishing, especially for Ultra Nightmare players, and especially when two of those wraith stones are on the same level in secret areas that can only be found by flying around on the dragon. And yeah, I've been avoiding it long enough. My absolute biggest problem with the game is the dragon and Atlan mech sections. They're not exactly thrilling to go through your first time, and I imagine I'll only come to resent them more and more as I begin my Ultra Nightmare grind. The biggest problem that I have with these sections, the dragon especially, is the lack of variety. You basically just do the same thing over and over again. Do menial damage, do a dodge, do actually good damage, rinse and repeat while fighting completely stationary targets for the dragon, and copy-paste titans for the Atlan, with a Cthulhu boss at the end for a bit of variety. I think the design of the mech and dragon are awesome, but the gameplay feels so much to be desired. The dragon flying should not feel inferior to piloting the biplane in Sly Cooper 3, and the mech section should not feel inferior to Giant Clank. The Atlan sections feel at their best when they give you a gun to use, and I feel like this should have been the design philosophy for all of these encounters. Just make it a scaled up version of the regular combat with souped up mega guns. Okay, that's... Listen, when my first instinct is to punch it, but then it's just like, no, you don't punch it, you use it, and then using it punches it, you're making me feel like a bit of a jackass game. But it's not even like your combat skills carry over. If anything, sometimes they'd fuck me up because every time I see a green attack coming towards me in Atlan or Dragon combat, I have to press the spacebar to dodge. When in regular combat, I have to press right click to parry. And that tripped me up a couple of times and had me jumping into enemy attacks. Doom Eternal got a bit of heat for its pacebreaker platforming sections because fucking spinning fire sticks looked like Super Mario or whatever crap, but they felt much more natural as pacebreakers because the game has such a heavy emphasis on movement. By improving at the platforming sections, you were improving at the game's combat. And you might not have noticed it, but your brain did. And skilled players can blitz through these segments in a couple of seconds each. I understand the need to have pace breakers in this game as well in between the constant combat, but I don't think these were necessary at all, especially since not only is this game incredibly long as it is, with 22 chapters, but also because just exploring around the level and trying to get all the upgrade materials will create plenty of pacebreaker moments moments itself. I get that the dragon's inclusion was necessary for the story being told here, but even then, I think there would be a way to include the dragon without needing to go into this minigame section. Like, he could be a special ability that you summon on a cooldown, kinda like the abilities that activate when you parry with your shield, so he flies by and blasts the enemies with a giant fireball. That still gives you a sense of attachment to the dragon, as well as a gameplay function that ties into the game's normal combat, and you'd especially be missing that effect the dragon gives you in the final level if you've been relying on it too much, which makes you want to kick the villain's ass even more. And that kinda pivots me into talking about the story. I don't care. I've never cared about the story in Doom, and this game didn't exactly convince me I should start. As far as I'm concerned, the story in Doom games is an excuse to get Doom Guy to do cool shit, and while I don't think this game delivered as much as Eternal on that front, it did have some pretty great moments, especially towards the latter half of the game. The characters outside of Doom Guy all felt relatively flat. There wasn't much to distinguish them from one another outside of the villain, who is evil, while the Sentinel guys are good. To be clear, that's not a major criticism. I don't need more than that in my Doom game. I'm not asking for this to be the fucking Devil May Cry anime where we're the morally gray guys who are bombing the demons like it's the War on Terror while Green Day plays in the background, because we're hacks who can't write to save our fucking lives. Speaking of Green Day, the music. I don't have much to say about it because unfortunately I could barely even hear it my first time through, since the default mixing that the game offers is kind of terrible if you want to hear it over the sounds of beefy guns firing and projectiles being parried. I know that Bethesda are fucking heartless bastards for how they treated Mick Gordon, and his absence is absolutely felt. I've never felt more ashamed of myself than I have by willingly giving them $70 for this game, in spite of how terribly they treated him. Let it be known that I tried to get the game from Keymailer. It didn't work, they didn't send it to me. But considering this would have been in my script for this review even if I had gotten it for free, I can't exactly say I blame them for cutting me off of a free copy. I feel like I've spent a lot of this video complaining, and yet my final opinion of the game is still very high. I am an outspoken Doom Eternal fanboy and defender, so it doesn't make it higher than that game for me, but I think I might end up liking this more than 2016 for its greater depth in combat and more unique game mechanics, even if some of the segments leave my eyes glazing over just as much as Samuel Hayden locking me in a room for several minutes to explain the plot to me, twice. There's not another FPS game like this out there, and I'm really glad that id managed to branch out and make something that isn't just Doom Eternal Plus, and have it be a success and a solid game, even if there's some hiccups along the way. I'd give it a definite recommendation, especially for Doom fans, but if the $70 price tag is too steep for you, then that's totally understandable. There's no shame in getting it on sale. Hell, I think Doom Eternal is one of the best FPS games of all time, but I still waited until it was on sale before I bought it, and that one was only $60 on launch, forget $70, or $100 if you're a crazy ass. In fact, by the time it's on sale, they'll probably have improved the game experience a lot more with updates. I'm hoping for some seriously tough master levels like we got in Eternal. Ultimately, Doom the Dark Ages didn't reach the same heights as Doom Eternal did for me, but I didn't expect it to. And I think that's what helped me have a really fun time with the game in spite of its shortcomings. And I bet this game will scratch the itch for some people that I had with Eternal. And maybe that and more time with the game will help me appreciate it even more. But I have a lot more to do in this game before I make my thoughts final. Hopefully by the next time you hear me talk about the Dark Ages, I'll have that golden Ultra Nightmare suit. Until then. Yeah, shut up. There's more gold here. I said shut up. Fuck out of my face. Gold! All I cared about. Now, what were you saying? Okay then.